Late in the afternoon, golden sunlight spilled across a quiet residential neighborhood on the city's northern edge. The trees lining the sidewalk cast long shadows across the brick pathway, forming interwoven patterns like a tapestry of time, layering untold stories beneath them. A gentle breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass and the faint sound of birds chirping in the distance. The entire scene felt like something out of a memory reel. Peaceful, simple, but so strangely fragile. Malcolm Hayes walked steadily along the pavement. Beside him was Rex, a large German shepherd with a black and gray coat, strong and muscular, yet his stride was remarkably light, as if in perfect sync with his master's every step. The leash was loosely held in Malcolm's hand, relaxed, yet fully controlled. Rex's ears twitched at the slightest sounds, his eyes always looking forward, alert but never tense. For Malcolm, afternoons like this were the most precious moments of stillness after long stretches of work, sometimes abroad, sometimes in conflict zones where a single mistake could cost a life. But today he had returned, and all he wanted was to savor a rare, peaceful moment with the most loyal companion of his life. Malcolm wasn't in uniform. He wasn't carrying anything but a light jacket and a pair of simple jeans. To a casual observer, he looked like any other man. Or at least, that's how it seemed to those who didn't know his past. Because the truth was, Malcolm was anything but ordinary. He had once been a member of Delta Force, the U.S. military's most elite unit assigned to top-secret missions where there were only two outcomes, survival or death. He had taken down notorious terrorist leaders, rescued hostages deep in enemy territory, and on more than one occasion, prevented disasters that never made the news. But here, in this neighborhood of red-tiled roofs and quiet hellos exchanged with nods and glances, that past meant nothing. Here, he was just a black man walking his dog, and to many, that alone was enough to raise suspicion. Malcolm knew the feeling all too well. The glances that seemed casual but lingered half a second too long. A curtain on the second floor, slightly pulled aside. A car that slowed down just enough, its driver watching him through the rearview mirror. A man crossing the street with his dog, avoiding eye contact. All familiar, like old wounds being scratched open again. Malcolm had learned not to react. He just walked, quietly. Let Rex guide him. Let his mind settle with the rustling of leaves above. But today something felt different. As he turned the corner near the park, a strange sound came from behind. Tires rolled slowly, then stopped. The noise was familiar enough that Malcolm instantly recognized it. A patrol car. He glanced to the side but didn't turn his head. He kept walking. But Rex didn't. The dog's ears perked up, his body pausing mid-step. Malcolm gave a light squeeze on the leash, a signal, steady. Rex understood instantly, looked up at his master, then resumed walking. The patrol car rolled forward, then crept alongside them. The window slid down. "Good afternoon, buddy," a man's voice called out. It wasn't friendly, but it wasn't outright hostile either. Just the hollow sweetness of someone used to wielding power like a shield. Malcolm stopped, turning slowly and deliberately. He gave a small smile, not defiant, not submissive, just polite, measured. "Good afternoon. Is there a problem?" The driver was a stocky middle-aged officer, his head half-bald, eyes betraying suspicion. The nameplate read, Calloway. The officer in the passenger seat had already stepped out, a tall younger man, face more severe, eyes glancing at Rex with a calculating look as if gauging the threat. His nameplate read, Miller. "You live around here?" Calloway asked, voice casual but probing. "Yes," Malcolm replied without hesitation. Calloway raised an eyebrow, dissatisfied with how certain the answer sounded. "That's odd." I don't remember seeing you before." Malcolm kept his polite smile. "I travel a lot for work. Just got back after 3 weeks in the Middle East. I work in private security, high-risk project protection." Miller scoffed, smirked. "Fancy way of saying mercenary, huh?" Malcolm didn't react. He'd heard that kind of provocation before. A good soldier knows when to stay silent. "Not exactly. I train emergency response teams for certain agencies and corporations, mainly to avoid dangerous situations." "Right. Then you'd know walking around with a dog this size in a quiet neighborhood could make people nervous," Calloway added, glancing at Rex with a smug tilt of his head. Malcolm's tone remained calm. "Rex is highly trained. Very obedient, more so than most people." Calloway sneered. Miller took a step closer, prompting Rex to pivot subtly, his gaze locking onto the officer's movement, a natural protector's instinct. "Can I see some ID?" Calloway asked. No longer a question. Malcolm knew his rights. He knew there was no valid reason to ask for identification. But he also understood that refusing would only escalate things. He slowly reached into his jacket pocket for his wallet, every motion deliberate, visible. Rex stepped back slightly, brushing against Malcolm's leg, his eyes never leaving Calloway. "Sure thing. Here you go," Malcolm said, handing over his ID. Miller glanced at it, then passed it to Calloway. The older officer's expression darkened slightly as he read, "Malcolm Hayes, former Delta Force." "Delta Force, huh? Sounds impressive. But you think that means anything to us?" Malcolm said nothing. He'd heard that line, or ones like it, too many times. On the battlefield, he was a hero. Here, he was a suspect. Calloway handed the ID back without another glance, his tone turning icy and laced with condescension. "All right, but we still need to ask a few more questions. Could you step over to the other side of the street?" Malcolm inhaled deeply. He could feel every signal, the shift in eyes, the hovering hand of Miller near his sidearm, and then, as if time froze for a moment, Rex let out a low, guttural growl, a warning, software, deep, like instinct whispering through the air. The atmosphere shifted. Malcolm tightened his grip on the leash, and in that moment, he knew. The storm had arrived. The wind changed direction. Gone was the gentle breeze that had earlier carried the scent of fresh grass. Now it carried the stench of gunpowder, the unspoken judgment, and the deadly silence lurking beneath a veneer of false politeness. Malcolm kept a calm gaze, but inside he had already switched into combat mode. He had learned how to read the rhythm of an enemy's breath on the battlefield, and here, on the sidewalk of his neighborhood, the two uniformed men in front of him were giving off the same signals. Miller stepped closer, his eyes now openly hostile. His hand remained near his gun belt, index finger twitching ever so slightly. A dangerous signal, just like a sniper adjusting the trigger tension moments before pulling it. "Your dog's showing signs of aggression," Miller said, voice low and cold. Malcolm shrugged slightly. "Rex only reacts to people who intend to harm me. Stay calm, and he won't do anything." "I said, restrain him!" Calloway suddenly shouted, sharp and harsh, as if the air itself exploded with the beat of a single heart. Malcolm tugged lightly on the leash, signaling Rex to step back. The dog didn't growl, didn't move, but his eyes were sharp as blades. Malcolm whispered a short command in German, the language used in tactical training, and Rex immediately lowered his body, ready but not attacking. Calloway sneered, pulling out his phone, scrolling briefly, then shaking his head. "Someone called in about a suspicious man walking a dog around the neighborhood. Description matches you." Malcolm frowned. "You just said I live here. So, how exactly am I suspicious?" Calloway slowly slipped the phone into his pocket and stepped closer. The scent of mint from his lozenge mixed with the sweat of power misused. "If you're smart, you'll step across the street. Otherwise, I'll call for backup." "Because I'm out walking?" Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "Or because I didn't bow my head while being insulted?" Calloway didn't answer. Instead, Miller reached out, grabbing Malcolm's wrist as if to escort him. "Big mistake." Rex growled, deep and sudden, lunging forward a split second before Malcolm could shout the command to stop. The leash pulled taut, but the force of the dog caused Miller to stumble back, instinctively reaching for his gun. "Rex, down!" Malcolm shouted, yanking the leash tight, his whole body snapping like a drawn bowstring. Rex stopped immediately, but Miller's gun didn't. A deafening shot cracked through the air. Birds scattered from the treetops in flocks. The atmosphere shattered. Malcolm felt nothing for the first 2 seconds, his brain refusing to accept what had just happened. But then his eyes fell. Rex lay there, hind legs collapsed, blood gushing from a deep wound in his left chest. No. No. No! He dropped to his knees, cradling the still-breathing body, the final breaths of a life that could never be replaced. Rex's eyes still locked onto his master. No blame, no fear, only loyalty, unwavering to the end. Calloway stepped back, hand already on his radio. "Suspect assaulted an officer, armed, requesting immediate backup." "I'm not armed," Malcolm screamed, his voice hoarse. "I was just walking. You killed my dog, you—" A fist struck the back of his neck. The world went dark. When Malcolm opened his eyes, he was lying face down on the cold floor of the police station. His wrists were cuffed behind him. His head throbbed. The stench of sweat, metal, and humiliation burned his nostrils. Outside the holding cell, laughter, the clatter of shoes, and somewhere Calloway's voice. That guy was ready to snap. "If you hadn't shot the dog, I might be in the hospital right now," Miller responded with a burst of laughter. "Pfft. Now he's just in there swatting mosquitoes. Big bad Delta vet, huh? Still ended up like the rest." Malcolm closed his eyes, not from pain, but because he needed clarity. He needed the cold, calculated calm that had once helped him survive firefights, airstrikes, and the loss of his brothers in arms. His eyes opened again. Cold, sharp, focused. "All right," he whispered. "You want a war? I'll give you one." The air inside the holding cell was thick, as if the concrete walls had absorbed every voice, every ounce of hope from those who had ever been thrown in here. Each cold tile pressing against Malcolm's back felt like a silent reminder. You don't belong here, but they have the power to make this your prison any time they want. He lay still, unmoving, eyes open, staring at the cracked ceiling. His mind was spinning, not because of the blow to the head, but because of the final images of Rex. The dog's eyes looking up at him, still waiting for a command, still trusting, right up to the very last breath. Silence hung heavy, but inside Malcolm a storm was brewing. If once upon a time he had fought for his country, now he would fight for something simpler. Justice for the friend who died at the hands of men who wore badges but had no honor. The metal door screeched open. A voice called out, "Name!" "Malcolm Hayes." Malcolm didn't respond. He slowly sat up. "You've got a lawyer waiting." The visiting room was lit by a single flickering ceiling bulb, swinging slightly like it was trying to keep time with the heartbeat of someone about to collapse. But the person sitting on the other side of the glass wasn't weak. On the contrary. Jasmine Hayes, Malcolm's only sister, sat with her arms folded, her gaze sharp as a blade. She wore a black suit, hair tied up, lipstick a deep crimson, a declaration of war in itself. "Brother," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but every word landed like a bullet chambering in a gun. Malcolm smirked. His lip was still stained with blood. "You found out fast." Jasmine didn't smile. "It's not that I'm fast. It's that they're stupid. They threw a man with a spotless military record, no criminal history, into a holding cell and beat him without even bothering to turn off the hallway surveillance cams. I've got a friend in internal affairs. Just watch the video copy." Malcolm froze. His eyes, used to darkness, sparked suddenly. A glimmer of realization that he wasn't completely alone. "Rex," he whispered. "I know," Jasmine said, her voice softening for the first time. "I'm so sorry." A long silence followed. No words were needed. Just the look exchanged between two siblings, one who had lost everything, the other ready to do anything to get it back. "Do you want to sue them?" Jasmine asked, calm but as sharp as a scalpel. Malcolm didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands, dried blood still crusted between his fingers. Then he looked up, each word dropping from his mouth like boulders tumbling down a cliff. "No. Suing isn't enough. You once told me, justice within the system is just a drawn-out game. Well, this time, I'm not playing." Jasmine tilted her head slightly. Her gaze slowed, but she didn't object. "So what are you going to do?" Malcolm didn't respond immediately. Instead, he smiled, not a smile of pain nor mockery, but the smile of a warrior who had finally found his path. 3 hours later, Malcolm was released. No apology, no explanation. All he got back was his wallet, with ID, a few bruises, and a reminder from a lieutenant he'd never seen before. "Best forget this ever happened, Mr. Hayes. Let it go, and you'll stay out of trouble." Malcolm nodded. "I never forget," he replied, his voice so calm it was terrifying. Jasmine drove him home. They didn't speak during the ride, but as they turned onto the quiet street leading back to the house, Jasmine finally broke the silence. "You know they won't stop, right?" "I know." "You also know they're expecting you to snap. They're waiting for you to explode, so they can justify finishing the job." "I know that, too." Jasmine gripped the steering wheel tightly. "So what's your plan?" Malcolm turned to look at his sister. His gaze was so calm it sent a chill. "Lure them into a trap." 3 days later. Malcolm's house had changed, not drastically. There weren't cameras in every corner, but all the sensitive spots, the front door, hallway, living room, even the floor lamp, had been outfitted with miniature recording devices, all signal jamming resistant. Jasmine looked around, impressed. "When did you do all this?" "First night back." "You didn't sleep?" Delta Force soldiers don't sleep when they know someone's chambering around. The sentence silenced Jasmine. That night, just as Malcolm had predicted, a black unmarked car glided silently past his house twice and disappeared. The next morning his mailbox was smashed. The following night his front gate light was broken. But Malcolm didn't react. He didn't call the police, didn't call for repairs. He just waited. And then, on the 5th night, they came. 2:13 a.m. A faint sound echoed from the back door. Not loud enough to wake the neighbors, but enough for Malcolm to spring out of bed, eyes wide open. He didn't grab a weapon, just his phone. Opened the security camera app and smiled. 2 figures, one slim, one broad-shouldered, gloves on, faces covered. But Malcolm recognized their stances immediately. Calloway and Miller. The door opened. They entered the house. And the entire sequence was captured. Faces, words, everything. "Where the hell is that mutt?" Miller muttered, flipping over chairs. "Find the damn clip." "He could have copied that video from the station," Calloway snapped. "What about the footage of me hitting him? You sure he didn't save it?" Sure about nothing. Just keep looking. Upstairs, Malcolm sat calmly, watching it all through his phone, listening to each word like reading an indictment. He opened a drawer, pulled out a portable hard drive, plugged it into his laptop, made 3 copies of the footage. One emailed Jasmine, one is uploaded to the cloud, one is locked in the safe. Then he walked downstairs, not to confront them, but to hand them the rope they would hang themselves with. Calloway looked up at the sound of footsteps. He immediately drew his gun. But Malcolm raised both hands. Evening, officers. Breaking into a civilian's home in the middle of the night. No uniforms, no warrant. What do you call that again? Don't you get smart with me, Miller barked. I've got no problem shooting again. Malcolm smiled faintly. Good, because people are going to love this clip. When Calloway and Miller walked out of Malcolm's house that night, they thought they had everything under control. They hadn't found any video, and there was no incriminating evidence. Every recording device they had searched was blank, or so they believed. What they didn't know was that the entire break-in, every step, every word, every stupid confession made in false confidence, had been captured from 2 hidden angles, cleverly concealed in the base of a table lamp and a potted plant by the front door. As the unmarked car drove away from the street, Malcolm stood in the shadows by the window, his eyes locked on the fading red taillights. One hand held a glass of water, the other a remote control. He pressed stop recording, a full stop marking the end of the first move in a game he'd been waiting a long time to play. He wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't angry. He didn't issue threats. Because he knew. To bring down men like Calloway and Miller, you didn't just win. You made sure the crowd convicted them before a judge ever could. And to do that, he needed a spark. The next morning, Malcolm didn't call the police. He called Jasmine. Less than 30 minutes later, she was at his house, a laptop in hand, open to a list of email contacts, freelance journalists, media outlets specializing in police accountability, civil rights watchdog groups. I need to know, Jasmine said as she sat at his desk. Just how airtight is this footage? Malcolm pulled a USB stick out of the safe and handed her a copy. Full audio, clear visuals, time-stamped, geotagged, no edits. You're sure? More than sure. And they have no idea they practically tied the noose themselves. Jasmine plugged in the USB and played the footage. She didn't speak for nearly 10 minutes. No reaction, no comments. But when it ended, she turned to Malcolm. Her eyes no longer those of a little sister, but of a legal warrior. We're not posting this on YouTube. Malcolm nodded. I wasn't planning to. We'll send it to people who know how to protect sources, independent reporters, civil rights attorneys, black community organizers. We don't make noise yet. We let it simmer. When it's hot enough, it'll explode. That day, Malcolm never left his house. But somewhere, in cramped apartments, indie coffee shops, tiny law offices, the emails started arriving, sent from an anonymous address with a subject line that read simply, "Police caught breaking into veteran's home, with full video evidence." Attached was a brief note, "You can ignore every story, but you can't ignore the truth in the video." 48 hours later, a website run by an independent investigation group called Justice Echo released the first clip. Not the full footage, but enough to show the public 2 police officers breaking into a private home in the middle of the night, not in uniform, with no warrant, and one of them was previously accused in the shooting death of the homeowner's pet. Within 3 hours, the video had surpassed 600,000 views. By that evening, the hashtag number #JusticeForRex began trending on Twitter. Calloway received the first phone call while eating dinner with his family. His youngest daughter said a classmate had sent her a video. When he watched it, His chopsticks fell from his hands. His face, Calloway, was on screen, opening Malcolm's front door, whispering, "Find the backup clip." If he saved the one from the station. Then came Miller's voice. "What about the footage of me hitting him?" If he kept that, we're screwed. Neither of them knew they were being recorded. Their voices, their tone, their movements, all crystal clear, terrifyingly so. Calloway slammed the phone down on the table. His heart pounded like war drums. At the police station, things weren't much better. Miller stormed into the police chief's office, slamming a folder on the desk. "Sir, you have to do something. They're spreading false information." The Chief A, man in a silver-gray suit who had previously shielded Calloway and Miller from multiple misconduct lawsuits, stayed silent longer than usual. He was reading a post from a prominent independent news site titled, "The Dark Record of Two Officers Tied to Over 12 Civilian Abuse Complaints." The chief looked up, his expression cold. "I told you not to give the media anything to grab onto." Miller fell silent. Calloway entered, drenched in sweat. I didn't know he had cameras. The house looked like nothing." The chief slammed down his coffee mug. "And because it looked like nothing, you let your guard down. From now on, no more cowboy moves. You're off the radar. Period." "What do you mean?" Miller barked. "Temporary leave. Unpaid. No statements. Let this fire burn out first." Calloway looked at Miller, eyes wide with panic. They both knew. This was the first sign of being left out to dry. Meanwhile, Malcolm sat in front of his screen, watching the video spread by the minute. He didn't say a word, but his eyes had changed. Not the eyes of a man seeking revenge, but of a man playing chess. And this board was only just set. That night the phone rang. "Malcolm Hayes?" "Speaking." "This is Michelle Graves, reporter from Truthline. I wanted to ask, are you ready to speak out?" Malcolm was silent for a few seconds. "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because this is just the first layer of dust. When the real storm hits, that's when I'll step forward." "Any message you'd like to send?" Malcolm leaned back in his chair, voice low and resolute. "I'm not a victim. I'm a survivor. And now I'm the one hunting." 12 years in Special Forces taught Malcolm Hayes one thing. When your enemy starts shouting, it's because they're feeling weak. And true to form, they were. After 3 days of suspicious silence, Calloway suddenly reappeared. Not on mainstream news, not in an official police bulletin, but in a leaked interview on a small right-wing television channel, hosted by a well-known anchor infamous for defending law enforcement. Calloway wore civilian clothes, sat leaning slightly forward, his tired eyes trying to project the image of a wronged man. He spoke slowly, firmly. "We didn't break in." The door was already open. "We simply wanted to question Malcolm over suspicions tied to prior violent behavior toward police. His dog was trained to attack. We followed standard procedures to ensure public safety." He paused, attempting a pained expression. "I've never shot anyone before, and now my badge is suspended over a doctored video." Malcolm watched the interview from home. Jasmine sat beside him, her face hard as steel. "The same tired tactic," she said flatly, "which is exactly why it still works." "On some people," Malcolm replied, taking a sip of water, "but those aren't the people I'm targeting." He set the laptop down, opening a thick folder Jasmine hadn't seen before. "Do you know who was the first to file a complaint against Calloway and Miller?" Jasmine shook her head. Malcolm pulled out an old photograph and tossed it onto the table. A large black man with a long scar running down his right jaw. "His name is Taryn Briggs, former Marine. Got 3 ribs broken by those two, and was falsely accused of drug possession." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. You tracked him down? Malcolm nodded. Not just tracked him. I'm meeting him tonight. The bar was old, tucked at the end of a quiet street. Dim yellow lights cast soft shadows on dark wooden floors. The scent of cigarette smoke mingled with cheap whiskey. In one corner a man sat quietly, his eyes carrying the weight of things the world preferred to forget. Malcolm walked over and extended a hand. Briggs? The man stood, gripping his hand with just enough force. Hayes. They sat. No small talk, no posturing. Soldier to soldier. Formality wasn't necessary. Briggs looked Malcolm dead in the eye. I've heard about your case, and I know those bastards. I need your help. Briggs nodded, like he'd already made up his mind. I've got files, photos, even an audio recording where they threatened to kill me if I spoke out. The problem is no one ever agrees to go public. Lawyers refused. Oversight boards dismissed it. And the media? He scoffed. They're part of the same damn system. Malcolm went quiet for a moment, then asked, If I gave you another chance, not just to speak, but to make the whole city howl, you would? You take it? Briggs stared at him. As long as I'm not doing it alone. 3 days later, Justice Echo dropped its second bombshell. Taryn Briggs's testimony, complete with injury photos, hospital reports, and a short audio clip of Calloway threatening him. This time the response was nuclear. The black community shared it en masse. Activists called for expanded investigations. A group of civil rights attorneys held a press conference demanding that the police chief release all records on Calloway and Miller from the past 6 years. The pressure mounted. And when a major television network ran the story in a primetime slot, the entire city woke up. Calloway shattered his glass while watching the news segment. They're dragging everything out. Miller burst into the room pale-faced. Someone's leaking from the inside. Don't tell me it's... Calloway turned to him, his face drained of color. You think it's him? Malcolm Hayes? You think he did all this alone? Miller didn't answer, because he already knew. The next morning in a small cafe in the city's East Side Art District, Malcolm met the third player in his growing campaign. Her name was Andrea Nguyen, a former investigative reporter from a regional TV station who had resigned after one of her exposés on police brutality was pulled at the last minute. Andrea was the first person to receive Malcolm's anonymous email, and the only one who didn't delete it. Can you give me the raw footage? She asked. Even the unreleased parts? Malcolm asked back. I need the evidence to go further. Not just social media. I want this to reach the national stage. Malcolm handed her the hard drive. Andrea took it, gripping it like a sword. I won't stop until they're not just out of a job. I want them disgraced before the whole country. 3 days later, Andrea appeared as a guest on the national investigative program In the Shadows. She presented an 11-minute video segment never before aired, cut together from footage of the break-in, Briggs's interview, and records Malcolm had gathered from other victims. The final clip was an audio quote from Calloway himself, taken from one of the recordings. Don't worry. I've got people on the inside. Worst case, I get my badge back in a few months and it's back to normal. After the episode aired, the police department's phone lines exploded. Over 1,200 calls, emails, and formal complaints poured into city offices within 8 hours. The next morning, the Tribune ran with the headline, "Does this city still have laws?" Malcolm didn't smile when he read the paper. He quietly folded it shut, stood up, and made a phone call. Jasmine, it's time for me to go public. The media had reached the boiling point. The name Malcolm Hayes no longer just appeared in articles or comment sections. It was in chants, on signs, and even in the dreams of those who had once suffered at the hands of violent police. A former Special Forces soldier, someone who not only survived but chose to fight back. They didn't know his full story, but they knew one thing. He didn't bow down. And today he chose to step into the light. The grand hall at the City Press Center had never been this packed. Every seat is filled. Both aisles were jammed. Live broadcast, national channels, radio, YouTube and Facebook streaming simultaneously. At the center of the stage stood Jasmine E., composed in a navy blue suit, microphone in hand, eyes cold as steel. She opened the press conference. Thank you to all the reporters, lawyers, advocates, and community representatives present today. This press conference is to reveal truths that have been hidden far too long, not just by the two officers you already know, but by the system that protected them. Her voice wasn't loud nor angry, but rang like a morning bell. The next speaker is not a politician, not an activist. He's a former Special Forces soldier who once fought to defend this flag, and now he fights for justice in his hometown. Jasmine stepped aside. Malcolm took the podium. Lights blazed down. Hundreds of lenses pointed at him. But Malcolm didn't flinch. He'd faced mortars. He'd held dying comrades in his arms. A press conference wasn't going to shake him. He began softly. I don't like public speaking. A light chuckle rippled through the room. But I figured, if I don't speak up today, no one else will say it completely. He paused, his eyes swept the audience. My name is Malcolm Hayes. I was a Delta Force operator, served more than 10 years in some of the world's most dangerous hot zones. But the first time I truly felt threatened was while walking my dog in the neighborhood I live in. Malcolm recounted the entire event, in the voice of a soldier. No embellishment, no tears. My dog Rex wasn't just a companion. He was a fellow soldier. He saved my life, more than once. But here, he didn't survive 30 seconds once Officer Miller drew his weapon. He never called them officers. He called them the shooter and the intruder. I was handcuffed, beaten, thrown to the ground, in my own home, and if not for that recording, I might have been listed in some fake indictment by now. The room grew still, dense. I'm not telling this to get your sympathy. I'm standing here because I want people like them, those who wear a badge but have no honor, to pay, not in money, but in freedom. After the press conference, the city trembled. On TV, Malcolm's speech about Rex was replayed for hours. Online, his words went viral, spreading alongside hashtags, number justice, for Rex, number we, or Malcolm number stop the shield. And then, just as Malcolm had predicted, it happened. That evening, Jasmine received an anonymous call. The man's voice was low, each word clenched between his teeth. You've pushed it too far, Ms. Porter. This should have stayed internal. Jasmine gave a cold laugh. Internal? You mean that snake pit? The voice didn't respond. It just issued a threat. If you don't want your brother to have another accident, you'd better learn when to stop. That night, Malcolm didn't sleep. Jasmine recounted the entire call, and instead of fear, Malcolm simply opened a drawer and pulled out a photo. It was of Rex, his loyal eyes staring straight into the camera. They don't understand. I've got nothing left to lose. He opened his laptop. On the screen, a dense, structured plan. A full case file of everything tied to Calloway and Miller. Internal police relationship maps. Social media accounts of key power figures, hidden behind aliases. We're not just playing with two crooked cops anymore. We're going after the system that protects them. The next day, Andrea Nguyen, the journalist who had worked with Malcolm, released an in-depth investigation. Headline, The Wall of Silence. When Power Hides Police Offenders from Accountability. The report named not only Calloway and Miller, but 2 lieutenants, an internal affairs deputy director, and a local judge who had dismissed Briggs's lawsuit 3 years prior. At the bottom of the article, Andrea left a note. This report was supported by a former soldier unafraid of guns. But who hates silence more? Andrea Nguyen. The blow shook the entire police department. A statewide independent investigation was demanded. But the other side didn't stay quiet either. 3 days later, Malcolm was nearly run over while crossing the street. The car was speeding, unmarked. The driver didn't stop. That same day, Jasmine was followed by a strange man from her office to her home. But they were ready. Malcolm installed 3 more layers of surveillance around his house. Jasmine hired 2 personal bodyguards, and both of them did not back down. This was no longer about Malcolm versus 2 cops. It was now a war between one man and an entire system. A system that killed his dog, beat him, and threatened his sister just to silence him. At the end of this segment, Malcolm stood in his bathroom looking into the mirror, his face scarred. 1 mark from Syria, another from Afghanistan, and the newest, from the night he was attacked in his own home. He didn't smile, he simply said, almost to himself, "They think I'm weaker without Rex. But they don't understand. I'm stronger now, because I have nothing left to fear." He turned to face the wall map. Strings connecting Calloway to Miller, to a lieutenant, to internal affairs, to an entire rotten system. Beneath the map, a handwritten note read, "Next, expose the whole system, one by one." That day, the city police department felt as if its blood had been drained. A state-level independent investigation team had just arrived. They wore no uniforms, offered no pleasantries. They simply flashed their credentials, then walked in with steel-cold eyes and briefcases full of sealed documents. Miller slumped into his chair. Calloway clenched his fists so tightly that blood stopped flowing to his fingers. The deputy director of internal affairs, the man who once had their backs, was now on unpaid leave. A whole era, one built on paperwork and connections, was beginning to crack from the very center. Meanwhile, Malcolm was not at home. He had left the city on a short trip to a place he hadn't mentioned since leaving the military, his old Delta Force training camp in Arizona. There was one man he once saw as a rival. But today Malcolm needed him as an ally. His name was Reuben Knox. Reuben had served in the same unit as Malcolm, but the two had never gotten along. Reuben was hot-headed, impulsive, and prone to breaking orders. Malcolm was methodical, disciplined, and cold under pressure. During one mission, Reuben nearly got their whole squad killed during a breach. After that, Malcolm had recommended him for reassignment to a support role. They hadn't seen each other since 10 years. But now Malcolm didn't call. He simply showed up at the old warehouse where Reuben lived, working as a fitness trainer by day and nightclub security by night. Reuben opened the door, unsurprised. He just smirked. "Thought you were dead." Malcolm replied coolly, "Still breathing? Thanks to not being like you." They stared at each other for a second, then both burst into laughter. A strange kind of laugh, but one with something familiar buried in it. That night, sitting beside a fire pit behind the workshop, Malcolm told him everything. About Rex, about Calloway and Miller, about the video, about a rotting system trying to crush him one last time. Reuben nodded slowly, his face sobering. "I know guys like that. Saw 'em in Iraq. Wore the uniform, but acted like rabid dogs. They're preparing to strike back," Malcolm said. "It won't be subtle this time." Reuben looked up. "What do you need?" Malcolm met his eyes. "I need someone to cover Jasmine. I need another shadow. So when I step into the light, someone is watching my 6. Reuben was silent for a few seconds, then nodded. "I owe you. If you hadn't blocked that report back then, I'd be rotting in jail for assaulting a fellow soldier." Malcolm left Arizona the next morning, and waiting for him when he returned was something chilling. A thin envelope, no sender. Placed neatly on his doorstep, inside was a fake death certificate with the name Malcolm Hayes. Attached was a typed message. This name will disappear. Once and for all. Jasmine saw it too. Her face turned pale. They've started. Malcolm just nodded. At the same time, Andrea, the journalist who'd partnered with them, called in a panic. "Malcolm, my account just got hacked. Someone got into the newsroom server. They know I was the one who leaked the original footage." Malcolm's voice hardened as he gripped his phone. "Come to my place. Stay the night. They're not stupid enough to make a public move here." That night, Malcolm's home became a fortress. Reuben had arrived. He sat on the front porch, gun laid across his thigh, earbuds in, soft jazz playing. But his eyes never left the street. Andrea sat in the kitchen, hands still trembling, but her gaze sharp with resolve. "I never thought it would get this serious." Jasmine brought her tea, placing the cup gently in front of her. "This isn't just about Malcolm anymore. It's about everyone who's ever been silenced by a badge." Malcolm stood at the window, watching the street. And now, it's time to strike back. The next morning, Malcolm released a series of confidential case files, over 30 in total. Each one tied to incidents where Calloway and Miller handled things their way. Cameras disabled, false reports, victims framed for resisting. He didn't post them online. He sent them directly to the State Justice Department. The local court system, the Federal Police Oversight Commission attached, was a video of Malcolm speaking. "If I disappear, or if someone in my team suffers a so-called accident, let this stand as our official statement. We did not take our own lives. And if it happens, all evidence has already been placed in your hands." The response was immediate. The department was forced to suspend all personnel involved with Calloway, Miller, and their old cases. A special oversight board was formed, and those who once defended the system began to flee it. But Malcolm knew. The last blow would come before the light could truly win. It came on the second night after the files were released. While Reuben was on watch, a black SUV, no headlights, no license plates, crept silently down the far end of the street. Malcolm saw it through the camera feed. He immediately triggered the silent alarm. Reuben raised his weapon, but the car didn't stop. It merely slowed down. Just enough for the window to roll halfway down. A voice rang out. "Still just a mutt mourning a mutt, Malcolm Hayes. Better vanish before your so-called justice ends up zipped in plastic." Then the car sped off. Malcolm turned to Reuben. Reuben growled, "If I catch them, they won't live to finish a second sentence." At the end of this chapter, Malcolm sits down to write letters to all the past victims falsely charged or abused by Calloway and Miller, inviting them to testify in the upcoming trial. Some said yes. Some were still afraid, but Malcolm knew. If he could stand tall for just one more week, history would no longer call it an isolated case. It would call it a purge. The heavy wooden door slammed shut. The sound echoed dry and grim like the end of an era and the beginning of an all-out war. The courtroom of the City Superior Court was packed. The media jostled for every inch of space. Former victims, civil rights lawyers, people who had once been too afraid to speak, all filled the gallery seats. Jasmine adjusted her blazer collar, eyes steady. Andrea Nguyen sat beside her, notebook in hand, mini recorder already running. Reuben didn't come inside. He stood outside the courtroom, hands behind his back, earpiece in his right ear, eyes scanning every unfamiliar face that moved too close to Malcolm. And then the two central figures walked in, Calloway and Miller, dressed in dark suits, no badges, no swagger. But still, the same stubborn arrogance in their eyes, the kind that had protected them for years. They stared at Malcolm. He stared bibacum, unblinking. The judge entered, Honorable J. Rutherford, known for his strict and unforgiving courtroom presence. We are opening trial number CR-2745. The people of the state versus Gregory Calloway and Anthony Miller. Are all parties present? Present, Your Honor, said Prosecutor Anna Layton, rising with icy clarity, representing the plaintiffs and related victims. The defense attorney, a gray-haired man with cunning eyes, nodded. Defense is present. The jury was called. Malcolm scanned each face. Men, women, black, white, Asian, middle-aged, young. But then his gaze stopped. One face was unfamiliar, not on the jury list published the day before. Malcolm leaned toward Jasmine and whispered, 7th seat, 2nd row from the right, not on the roster. Jasmine flipped through her notes, her brow furrowed. Last-minute substitution. The original juror, Mrs. Harriet Shaw, dropped out for personal reasons. This guy was added this morning. Malcolm looked again. White, shaved head, muscular, sitting too straight. Nothing about him felt accidental. Prosecutor Layton opened with a speech as sharp as a blade. Today is not about a misunderstanding, not about a tragic accident. It is about a systematic model of violence, sanctioned by the badge, legitimized by power, and only stopped because someone dared to stand up. Then came the defense attorney, smooth voice, controlled tone. My clients are not saints, but they are police officers, men who operate under pressure in high-risk situations. And nothing here proves they acted beyond legal bounds. Malcolm pressed his lips together, not surprised. The trial moved into its first phase, witness testimonies and initial evidence. Malcolm was the first to take the stand. He was sworn in, sat upright, eyes unwavering. The prosecutor asked, Mr. Malcolm Hayes, please recount the night when you were approached by the defendants and your dog, Rex, was shot. Malcolm told the story, just as he had in public before. But this time every word was carved into a legal record. I didn't resist. I handed over my ID. I stood still. My dog didn't lunge. He stood beside me. When they threatened to detain me, Rex growled. A standard trained reaction. I said, Rex, stay. He hadn't even moved. And Miller pulled the trigger. The courtroom went still, heavy as stone. And after that, I knelt by Rex. There was blood. I begged for help. They cuffed me, beat me, tased me. Layton held up a photo. Malcolm bruised, taser burns across his chest. Gasps filled the room. And at your next encounter with them, they broke into my home, no warrant, injured me, threatened me, told me, you're just another black guy with a dangerous dog. Some spectators were visibly shaken. Andrea Nguyen covered her mouth. Jasmine gripped her hands so tightly that her knuckles turned white. During cross-examination, the defense lawyer tried to twist the narrative. Mr. Hayes, is it true you are a former Delta Force soldier with combat experience? Yes. Is it possible, then, that your presence alone could be perceived as threatening by two officers unfamiliar with you? Malcolm looked him square in the eyes. I'm a veteran, not a murderer. That afternoon, Taryn Briggs's video testimony was presented. He described his broken ribs, the false charges, and Calloway's threat. Don't think you can speak. We've got the system behind us. Day 2, Andrea Nguyen took the stand. She presented emails, audio recordings, and phone threats. I've faced no threats exposing governments in the Middle East, but I'm being threatened now for exposing this city's police. The courtroom applauded, despite being scolded by the judge moments later. Day 3, a twist. Juror number 7, the suspicious man, requested a private discussion with the judge. After a 15-minute recess, Judge Rutherford returned, voice somber. A juror has admitted potential bias. A family member was previously assaulted by a person of color. The room fell silent. We are forced to replace this juror immediately. Jasmine jumped up. Objection! This should have been disclosed beforehand. The judge shook his head. Procedure allows for replacement if bias is confirmed. Malcolm knew. This was the counter-move. That man, maybe not openly racist, but certainly planted to derail the trial from within. He turned to Layton. What about the home invasion video? Calloway and Miller, no warrant, physical assault, threats. When will that air? Tomorrow morning. That night Malcolm sat alone in the dim glow of his study. Reuben entered, placing a beer on the table. Something stinks. Smells just like when I got pulled off the Fallujah op. Malcolm sighed. They planted a saboteur, trying to flip the case from the inside. So what now? Malcolm stood, opened his safe, pulled out a USB. If the court doesn't uphold the truth, then the public will. At the end of this part, near midnight, Andrea Nguyen received a special file labeled Final Trigger Public Release Protocol, accompanied by a simple note. If the trial is delayed or overturned, release it. No mercy. 7:35 a.m. The courtroom hadn't opened yet, but the atmosphere in the hallway was already ready to explode. A rumor had begun circulating among the press. Juror number 7, the mysterious last-minute replacement, had financial ties to one of the defense attorneys. No one dared confirm it, but Andrea Nguyen already knew. She didn't ask Malcolm. She didn't ask Jasmine. She simply looked at the USB Malcolm had given her the night before. No encryption, no password, just one single folder. If the system fails, release this. Andrea knew exactly what it meant. 8:10 a.m. Malcolm and Jasmine arrived at the courthouse. Reporters swarmed them. Reuben stood behind, eyes sweeping every suspicious face. Andrea gave Jasmine a silent nod, lifting her phone in signal. I'm ready. 8:30 a.m. The session resumed. Judge Rutherford spoke sternly. Before we proceed with the defendant's cross-examination, the court must announce an unusual development. A juror has withdrawn due to alleged personal safety threats. Therefore, we are forced to suspend this hearing earlier than scheduled. Malcolm immediately stood up. Your Honor, suspending the hearing means we are letting the system surrender to intimidation. Jasmine followed firmly. This also violates the time frame for a federal civil trial. We have new evidence, a fully admissible home security video showing Calloway and Miller assaulting the victim. Judge Rutherford shook his head. That video still requires further authentication. And without a full jury, a fair trial cannot proceed. A slap to the face of truth. Once again, the same system that killed Rex tried to bury Malcolm's voice. 8:42 a.m., just as the judge rose from his seat preparing to leave. A storm of alert notifications buzzed through dozens of phones in the courtroom. A journalist shouted, "Live on News 24. New footage of police abuse just dropped." Andrea Nguyen had hit the broadcast button. The entire video, showing Calloway and Miller breaking into Malcolm's home without a warrant, punching his face and kicking his chest while he offered no resistance, streamed nationwide. Calloway snarled, "A filthy black mutt like you thinks you can come after us?" Each word ripped off the mask of morality that the system had worn for decades. On screen was Malcolm, hands tied, face bloodied, eyes still staring forward. Then the camera caught Miller, clear as day. Shame there wasn't a dog to shoot this time. The courtroom erupted. A reporter threw his headset on the ground. A witness in the gallery broke down in tears. Outside the courthouse, crowds began chanting, "Justice for Rex! Malcolm is the people! No more silence!" Judge Rutherford banged for order, but no one listened. A court clerk, face pale, rushed in with a thick folder. "Your Honor, the video has gone national. The Federal Inspector General's office is demanding an emergency restart of all proceedings under a new subpoena." The judge nodded. For the first time in his life, he was no longer in control. That day, Malcolm Hayes became the top headline across the country. CNN, CBS, ABC News all replayed the footage. Social media exploded. Multiple hashtags trended simultaneously. Joe Rex was innocent. Der Hayes trial. Unqualified immunity. The defense attorneys for Callaway and Miller were pulled from the case that very night on charges of conspiracy and evidence suppression. The two defendants were led out in handcuffs, not for temporary detainment this time, but for transfer to a federal holding facility awaiting higher court prosecution. As for Malcolm, he returned home, opened the door, sat down, said nothing. Reuben opened the fridge, grabbed 2 beers. Andrea called, shouting into the phone, "We did it, Malcolm!" "They can't stop it now." Jasmine arrived, placing a hand on her brother's shoulder. "You've done what an entire system was too afraid to do." Malcolm answered only once. "It wasn't because I was strong. It was because I stopped being afraid." That night people gathered outside the federal prison. There were no riots, only candlelight. A little girl held up a handmade sign. "Uncle Malcolm, I have a dog named Brune, 002. Thank you for showing the world. We deserve protection too." Malcolm saw the image online. He didn't speak, then turned to Jasmine. "Tomorrow, we keep writing. This story doesn't end here." She nodded. "Tomorrow we walk back into court, and this time, no one will dare stand between truth and justice." 3 weeks after the video went viral nationwide, the Federal Court of California convened a historic trial of unprecedented scale. Barricades lined the streets. Crowds packed 3 city blocks around the courthouse. Banners waved everywhere. "Justice for Malcolm." "They took Rex. We take the mask off." Power must answer to truth. This was no longer an individual case. It had become the showdown between citizens in a decaying system of unchecked power. Malcolm Hayes wore a crisp white shirt, a gray suit, and a navy tie, poised and calm. He ascended the grand steps of the federal courthouse, flanked on both sides by hundreds of journalists live-streaming his every step. Reuben followed silently. Jasmine and Andrea walked beside him, each carrying a role, a dream, and a shared conviction. Truth was no longer a luxury. Inside the courtroom sat a representative from the U.S. Department of Justice. For the first time in the city's history, a police misconduct trial had been elevated to the federal level under charges of civil rights violations, unlawful assault, unjustified killing of an animal, and systemic falsification of criminal records. Callaway and Miller, once arrogant men in tailored suits, now wore orange federal prison uniforms, hair disheveled, eyes vacant. For the first time they had nothing to say to the press, because no one was left to speak for them. Federal prosecutor Lydia Romero began with a seismic declaration. This is not just the trial of 2 officers. This is the trial of the American people asking, will we allow the badge to shield criminal acts? Is justice a privilege reserved for the white, the wealthy, the credentialed? Or is it the right of all of us, black, veteran, or even a dog named Rex? Once again Malcolm was called to the stand, but this time no interruptions, no twisted questions, no sarcasm. He stood there, serene, like a father saying farewell to the past. "I served in Delta Force. I've walked through some of the worst war zones on Earth, but never have I felt more threatened than when I walked my dog in the neighborhood where I bought my home. The courtroom held its breath. I'm not here asking for special treatment. I'm here because no one should be punched in the face for the color of their skin. No dog should be shot for growling to protect the one it loves. They didn't just kill Rex. They killed trust in the law. Malcolm clutched the old leather collar of Rex, now worn around his wrist like a keepsake. I've forgiven them. But forgiveness doesn't mean letting them roam free. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. The next day, the remaining witnesses took the stand. Andrea Nguyen brought a special report. 87 cases of assault and false accusations against people of color in the past 6 years, all involving either Calloway or Miller. A mother recounted her son being beaten for having a suspicious gait. A 15-year-old boy described having a gun pointed at his head. Because he wore a black hoodie while walking home. Voices once silenced now echoed through the courtroom. Forming a choir of truth no one could mute. On the final day, Calloway and Miller's lawyer had nothing left to defend. He merely pleaded for leniency, citing psychological stress from a high-risk occupation. The courtroom burst into bitter laughter. Jasmine stood and requested a final rebuttal. My brother didn't ask for sympathy. He demanded that the law do its job. And today we don't just ask for a verdict. We ask that public institutions finally admit the system's failure was not in a few bad apples, but how long did it stay silent? After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The federal judge, an elderly black man, silver-bearded with eyes that seemed to pierce through history, stood and read the verdict. Gregory Calloway and Anthony Miller. You are found guilty of federal civil rights violations, unlawful assault of a civilian, the illegal killing of a domestic animal, evidence tampering, falsifying records, and abuse of power. This court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison without parole. You are permanently barred from holding any public office or position in any government institution for the remainder of your lives. Applause broke out. No one held back. Calloway dropped his head. Miller sobbed uncontrollably. Behind bars, for the first time in their lives, they no longer had the shield of a badge. Outside the courthouse, thousands stood applauding. No more chanting, just standing quietly, as if holding a vigil for the years justice had been cast aside. Malcolm did not speak. He simply descended the steps and bowed, a silent salute to those who had stood for him. A child stepped forward, holding a drawing. A German shepherd is lying beside a man in body armor. Malcolm knelt, took the picture, and placed a hand on the boy's head. Thank you, kid. Rex would have loved that. That night, in a small cemetery by the forest, Malcolm returned to Rex's grave. He said nothing. He simply placed a badge, not a police badge, but a Medal of Civil Valor from the Department of Defense, awarded after the trial as a symbol of courage in the face of injustice. The medal rested gently below the small stone that read, Rex, the fearless friend, the brother who never betrayed. Malcolm looked up at the sky. The wind brushed past his shoulder, and for the first time in many years, he was no longer afraid. Final message. Malcolm's fight was not just for Rex, not just to clear his name, but to prove justice is not a distant dream. It only takes one person, willing to walk toward the light. Summary. A story of truth, honor, and hope. The story of Malcolm Hayes did not begin with triumph. It began with a gunshot, fired at a loyal dog, fueled by suspicion, violence, and the arrogance of unchecked power. But from that moment we saw one truth. Even without power, a single man, armed with truth and resolve, it can bring an entire system to its knees. From pain to awakening. Malcolm wasn't enraged by a punch or a pair of handcuffs. He was enraged because an innocent soul, Rex, died from ruthless arrogance. He didn't fight back with his fists. He fought back with strategy, discipline, and the heart of a soldier who once fought for his country. He didn't just seek justice for himself. He unmasked a rotting system, gave dozens of victims a voice, and sparked a movement demanding lasting reform. Core message: justice is not a privilege. It is the birthright of every human being, rich or poor, white or black, soldier or civilian. The system won't fix itself. It takes brave people, like Malcolm, Jasmine, Andrea, and even Rex, to stand up, expose it, and reclaim what's right. Truth cannot be buried forever. No matter how powerful the oppressor, no matter how distorted the law, truth will find a way if someone stands up for it. What this story leaves us: a reminder that sometimes a dream of justice doesn't need to begin with revolution. It begins with one man walking his dog, refusing to bow. A symbol. That honor doesn't come from a uniform, but from what we choose to do when no one is watching. And a hope that even though Rex is gone, his death sparked a flame that millions who were once voiceless now carry forward. Dedicated to Rex, the fearless friend. You didn't live to see justice, but you are the reason it happened. Rest easy, Rex, we won.